And welcome to part 2, where it comes to everything subjective when it comes to selling a gaming PC. We're finally going to go through each of these rigs. First, talk about the personal touches, how much I put them together for roughly, then how much I intend to sell them for, and then after that, we can talk about a heap of other factors involved in the market and what you need to look out for, especially when it comes to selling that gaming PC. But let's start off with the first example here. We've got an RGB case. This is called the TG, I think it's 302 or 301. It comes with 4 RGB fans pre-installed and a remote controller, and it's tempered glass. So that would be about 50 USD. Now, one thing is too, the whole video today is going to be in Aussie dollars. Because that's my local market, because I deal in Australian dollars, I'm both picking up the deals and selling them in Aussie dollars. I'm going to be talking in Aussie dollars. If you want to know the conversion rates, just simply go over to Google and type them in, and you'll get your respective currency and how much I'm paying and whatnot in your local currency. But let's look at this build here. 1660 Super. I picked this up for 330 bucks. The rest of the components, we had a motherboard, RAM, and then a power supply. The case was 70. The cooler, the Xeon 12 70 V2. We got all this in total. This build would have been about 650 bucks to put together. Now we're going to be selling this for around 950, and so we're going to hopefully make about 300 Aussie dollars profit on this build. And now the reason I'm able to charge the 300 Aussie is because I'm simply going to be adding value in the sense that I got my SSD and my hard drive, which are tucked behind there. They're really cheap. I got them for $40 for the pair pretty much. The RAM is some really nice stuff. I got that for 50 bucks. For the pair. The motherboard is a top tier board, and we got this for, I think initially I got it for $80, but then I sold it for 120 and I got it back for 120. Then the Xeon, the 1270 V2, we got that for roughly, I think, so around $50 or so. Then as we said before, 330 and 70 for the case. So tallying it all up, it really is looking like I'll make a couple of $100 on this build. It's looking good, and we don't have to spend too much time thinking about things because we know what we got the deals for, and we know the going rate for a 1660 Super PC with essentially an i7 16GB RAM SSD hard drive. Let's move over now to this next one here. This is a low-end system. I think this one here is interesting because I put this up for sale initially and it came back to me where the person wanted to upgrade it even further. So I actually traded this one back in, but I sold this initially for 300 Aussie dollars, and it had an 8-core in it, and I really kind of, it happened about a couple of weeks ago. So what I decided to do was take the 750 Ti out of it, put it in this build here. That way I could use the included power supply, saving me some money on this case. And then I could put a GTX 660 inside here. And we've got an SSD, 1TB hard drive, 8GB of RAM. I decided to take out the 8-core as well, since it wasn't well fitted for this motherboard, and put in a 4-core FX 4300. So all up, this build would have costed me, I didn't even know, because I think I've got this graphics card thrown in for free with another deal. We got $40 in drives, case, power supply, motherboard, everything like that. This thing would have max costed me $150. So there's $150 profit there for this build. That's what I'm going to guesstimate that at. Moving over to this next build here, we got the GTX 750 Ti, the G4560, and that motherboard that we cleaned all the paint off. Now, this build has a new case power supply. It's also got the SSD hard drive. Same thing. All these builds here pretty much have 1TB and 120GB SSDs. That's because I scored a massive deal on the both of them. But when it comes to, we got a single stick of 8GB of RAM, which isn't ideal, but again, 8GB of DDR4, it's going to match this price point. And since it's a 2-core, 4-threaded CPU, GTX 750 Ti, we're going to hopefully advertise it just like the one beside it for pretty much a Fortnite gaming PC, where we'll charge pretty much similar money, but because it's got DDR4 and it's got newer components than a 750 Ti, we might be able to get around 350 Aussie dollars for this next system. So how much did this one cost me to put together? Well, we've got the RAM stick, which is about 40 Aussie dollars. We actually pulled that out of the TechFast PC, which I've already flipped that PC and made profit on. So technically I could even price this as free, but that's the synergy of doing all these different builds and hustling. That's what you're gonna do. The more builds you do and the more parts you mix and match, and the more, like even this GTX 660, for example, the more we do that and pull those out and create value, the more profits we're gonna make in the long term collectively. But getting back to this one right here, This one I'm gonna price up at 350 Aussie dollars, and I believe off the top of my head, I would have paid maybe $100 max for this build because of the components. Like this board here, I pretty much got this for just shouting the person I met dinner, and I cleaned off all the paint and it worked again. And yeah, the G4560 bonus, 40 bucks in drives, 750 Ti, which came back in another build, power supply and case. So yeah, guesstimating it's around 100 Aussie dollars this thing owes me, maybe even less, but hey, we're gonna make a nice little juicy profit off it. Moving down here, we've got the next one here is the Snowman on top of an X5660 on an Intel motherboard. So we got 16 gigabytes of RAM. We can add another 8 gigabytes, but it's gonna run absolutely fine in dual channel, especially if we want to overclock it a little bit, since we will be able to overclock on this board. And we've got a nice power supply in there. I think it's like a 550 watt. We got an RX 590. We've got 120 gigabyte SSD, 1 terabyte hard drive. And so the balance here, I'd say I'd be charging around 750 Aussie dollars for this build. So all up, this one, I think I'm not gonna be making a whole lot of money because I'm using an Intel X58 board, which I bought in Japan for around $130. And that, I've just had it sitting here for a long time. Like I had the intention of using it for a really high-end build, but then I realized like Intel stopped doing the BIOS updates, and I made sure I updated the BIOS a year ago, but I'm lucky, but that board essentially is not gonna be that good going into the future. So what I'm gonna do with this is just pretty much not make much money on this build at all. I'm gonna charge around 750 Aussie dollars, but I think I'm gonna be making $100 at most. But at the same time, I'm gonna be getting rid of some of the mistakes I made in the past on this PC. And so you can see here too, right? Before we move on to the next two PCs, we've got 1 and 2 here. These are the higher end PCs in this whole bunch, and they've got the RGB bling. And so I've said this many times in the past, the higher you price your PCs, you also definitely want the aesthetics to go with it. Some people like to critique me a lot on the cables. I've found, especially on builds that are priced 1,000 Aussie dollars and under, people have never asked me for custom cables. They just don't care. Because I do remember the young Tech Yes kid. Before I even got into tech, I'd look at PCs and I'd be like, wow, that looks so good at that price point. And then I'd just be looking up graphics cards, and I remember some of the things I'd used to look at. I used to look at the speeds of the CPU as opposed to actually understanding really anything to do with it. The gigabytes of RAM, the gigabytes of RAM on the video card. Those were things that now that I realize that younger me and the thinking of not knowing anything about tech and buying my first gaming PC, those things apply so much to people who are going to be buying these gaming PCs. So when we look at the aesthetics, when we look at the specs, when we look at everything involved, if your PC has all those and the competitors don't, you're gonna be getting a one up on them. But I definitely know one thing about the younger gaming kid, the young Tech Yes kid. Before I even knew how to build PCs, if I went to look for a gaming PC, the only things I'd be concerned with was, wow, that looks pretty neat, and what gigabytes of RAM does it have on the graphics card, and what are the speeds of the CPU? They were the only things you were really concerned with. So when it comes to, especially on like a PC that's around this price point, having cables that are just neatly managed, you don't have to worry too much about the color coordination of them. I'd say once you step it up to a $3,000 or $2,000 PC, yes, definitely start worrying about everything on the build. But 1,000 Aussie dollars and under, I've never had one person ask about cables or custom cables. Of course, me doing this video now, I might get some trolls now starting to ask those questions, but that's the good thing about having years and years of experience doing this beforehand. You are able to correlate sort of questions and trends together and then able to keep going. But let's look at this next one right here. We've got an RX 570, FX 6300, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 120 gigabyte SSD, 1 terabyte hard drive, brand new case, and a half decent power supply. I think we pulled this power supply out of another build. The case is around 39 Aussie dollars. The cooler, this came with the motherboard and the CPU. So we got that whole combo off that deal that we did right before Christmas. 16 gigabytes of RAM is probably like 50 bucks. The $60 graphics card, $40 in drive. So we put this whole build together maybe under 200 Aussie dollars. Now we're going to be asking around 420 Aussie dollars for it, so we make a nice juicy profit and then we move on. The next one here, we've got the VS550 and we've also got an RX580, i7 2600 and 16 gigabytes of RAM, 120 gigabyte SSD, same stuff. And I believe this one might even have a 240 gigabyte SSD actually, instead of the 120. And we've got a 1 terabyte hard drive. Now, this is obviously, this one lost the tray for the mount there, so the hard drive, you see it's at an angle, but spec-wise and performance-wise, this thing performs really nicely. So I'm gonna be going roughly in the $600 price range for this. And yeah, this one, in terms of putting it together, again, $60 RX 580. And this build actually came as a trade-in, just like another PC we had, because the person wanted to upgrade to a higher end system. So I was able to trade this in, I believe, for roughly 300 Aussie dollars or so. And then, yes, we're adding the $60 graphics card on top. And then hopefully we'll profit around about 250 Aussie dollars. So there it is, all with those systems, guys. You can see that in total, we're hopefully going to make roughly over maybe around about 1,000 Aussie dollars on these 6 systems. That's not a whole lot of money considering it's going to take me a little while to sell them, but it's a great thing to do on the side. And of course, I'm getting good deals and I'm able to then price my builds competitively so they sell and they're not sitting on the marketplace week after week. And so that's one thing you want to make sure. For me personally, I've got a pretty good turnover rate. I'm pretty healthy in the way I do these things and I make sure they work. I guarantee my systems and I offer pretty decent value. And that's, at the end of the day, what you want to be doing when it comes to selling these PCs. And if you're doing it as a hobby like I'm doing, then definitely just keep moving along and looking for those deals. However you want to get the deals, I don't know. As long as you're not breaking any laws and you're doing it right, then go for it, be my guest. But this is these 6 PCs right here, but now we're gonna move on to and expand on yesterday's theory of what we were talking about with the objective side of things. If you haven't seen that part, I'll put the link up here, but now we're gonna go into all the subjective sides. And there's a lot to it, right? We've got the, first off, the i7 phenomenon. We're gonna talk about this straight away because I've noticed when I got back from overseas, 2016, end of 2016, i5s were still in high demand. But fast forward now to the end of 2019, start of 2020, i7s are now the way to go. You want an i7 in your build, even if it's a first gen i7, that sells. People were looking for i7 because their friends have got i7s and they see i7 on TV. They're like, wow, I went down to Harvey Norman. They had an i7 laptop. It was $2,000. This desktop has an i7. That's all they care about is i7, i7, i7. Mind you, the smart consumers, I'm finding a lot of the real smart consumers are asking for a Ryzen CPU, but that's usually on the higher end. And even then, a lot of people that know about the Ryzen CPUs know how to build their own systems too, and they usually like doing that. So when it comes to selling these gaming PCs, i7 is a definitely in-demand meta, as well as an NVIDIA graphics card. We're gonna go over this right now. But this NVIDIA market share and subsequent mind share is something to be aware of if you want to flip gaming PCs. For instance, if we get a 1066 gigabyte build, that build will perform maybe, I think in 2020, perform a little bit worse than an RX 580 8 gigabyte build. But the thing is, the 1066 gigabyte, that will sell faster and I can sell that for more money than the RX 580 build. That's just how the market is where I'm at locally. But one more thing as well, if we look at another example, RTX 2060 super builds. I did a couple of them over Christmas. I also did a 5700 XT build. It took me longer to sell the 5700 XT build at $100 less than the 2060 super builds. And this is real. So the NVIDIA mind share out there is that people want to get NVIDIA graphics cards in their gaming PCs. There's this big wave that exists where people want to game on PC on NVIDIA. So for me, I'm not going to argue with the trends. I'm just going to accommodate for them and make a bit of profit. And so my advice, take this subjective thing that goes on in the industry, use it and utilize it to your benefit. Don't be the guy who's the hero running around on forums, banging your chest all the time, wasting your time writing comments about how the RX 580 should be selling better than the GTX 1066 gigabyte. Nobody cares. For me, I just look at those numbers, and the great way I'm gonna interlude here with putting in the Steam survey numbers, This is a great way of checking what's going on in the markets and trends that you can see. One funny thing was that the Nvidia market share it sort of bounced down a little bit, but now it's bouncing up towards Christmas. And you can also see that with the Intel sales on CPUs. They were bouncing up around Christmas. So whatever happened over Christmas, you just had that mass amount of Christmas buyers rushing in, and they were picking up Intel CPUs with Nvidia graphics cards for gaming PCs to at least play on Steam in droves. So basically what that tells me over the Christmas period is I should be offering a lot of i7 1066 gigabyte builds if I can pick up those parts, because they're the parts that are going to be in demand according to the Steam surveys, but not just the Steam surveys, at least according to what I've experienced selling products in the market. But now moving on to the most important thing you can ever do when you sell a gaming PC, and that is your advertisement or your advertisement if you're in the US. Basically with that is your open broadcast to the world. What do you want people to see when you're selling your PC? I'll give you some hints. You want a clean profile picture. You want a clean picture of the PC. You want a detailed spec list of things. And here's where you can also utilize, say for instance, some of those advantages to your play. You can say it's got a genuine Intel i7. You can say it's got a GTX 1060 with 6 gigabytes of VRAM. Always make sure that you utilize what you've got to the best of your advantage. Even though we've got an RX 570 and a GTX 1060 sells better, we can still utilize Fortnite, because I know for a fact that RX 570s and 580s perform very well compared to their GTX 1060 counterparts in Fortnite. So we can then say RX 570 plays Fortnite better than a GTX 1060, 3 or 6 gigabyte. I'm guessing it'll actually probably almost play it better than a 6 gigabyte. I'd have to double check, but I will double check that before I put my ad up. But that's now a selling point, because someone who is going to pay $750 for a GTX 1060 6 gigabyte system to play Fortnite may then go back to this RX 570 system, which is cheaper, and go, hey, I'm going to get the same performance, otherwise we'll go buy that cheaper system. And so that's how you can use the advertising to your advantage, and you can really make the most of it. And that's the subjective nature. Now, there's a thing going on around Facebook last month. I saw some dude, because I check my competition, I check out what they're doing. If they've got new tips and ideas and they're really good and I look at them, I'm like, wow, that's actually a good idea. I'll go and copy paste that. Don't be afraid to copy paste your competitors. If they're doing something and you know it's working and they're doing it really well, then go do it. I know when I started out doing 3-month guarantees on my systems, I noticed a sway of other people started doing it because it worked. But for instance, on the marketplace where I lived, I noticed over Christmas there was one dude selling PCs, and he literally had his profile picture of a chick being strangled. And I was like, what's this guy doing? Like, you got to put yourself in the shoes of an average person going to buy a PC. I mean, if I was going to buy a PC and I saw a profile pic of a chick getting strangled, I'd be like, look, I just want to buy a gaming PC. I'm not after anything extra. So there are some things you definitely want to, when it all comes down to it, have a clean listing, have a clean profile pic, have a clean pictures of your PC, and then go from there. That's of course if you want to make profit. If you're just doing it for a bit of lols, then I don't know, maybe you're in the wrong field. But more on the subjective thing, that's what we've talked about right now, is being proactive, doing things that you can do that are going to make the most difference before your competitors do them. But there's also something to be aware of, and that's sometimes you've got to be reactive as well. And that if something comes out, or if, say for instance, AliExpress starts having a flood of these cheap CPUs all of a sudden, and just your competitors notice about them before you do, and they're suddenly selling all these really cheap PCs on the market, you have to react to that. And so you might have to quickly bring down your prices, get rid of your current stock, and then adjust to the new metas. So there are things that you have to do. I mean, for me, I'm lucky in the last few years that it's always been a gradual change, at least with a few months in advance on leeway. So I'm able to adjust to that over time, and so I'm not losing really any money. But sometimes you have to be quick and you have to be reactive and react to the situation. For instance, I wasn't really doing the hustle in 2014 with used PCs, but I know for a fact I did sell a GTX 780 right before the 970 came out. And so this was, I easily know by far, was one of the worst examples of a price drop, and I think sellers who have had stock would have had to have been reactive in this situation. That's when the 970 dropped at $330. The 780s before that were like $500, and then the 970 drops. It's got better performance, or it's got very similar performance. It's much more efficient, and it's a much more in-demand graphics card. Little did people know that had 3.5 gigabytes versus the 3 gigabytes, as they thought it was 4 gigabytes versus the 3. But regardless, it did have more VRAM, it was a much better card, and it dropped, and all of a sudden those 780s that were up for sale for 500, I was lucky to offload mine for around about 500. It was a Lightning edition, I got it really cheap, and then I offloaded it right before the 970 released, and I was really lucky to do that, because I would have lost like $200 instantly, because those cards, those 780s, they crashed all the way down to like $300, sub $300 levels after that 970 was reduced. So if something like that happens in the market, just be aware that sometimes you have to adjust to it quickly, otherwise you're going to lose more money than what you've already lost. And so if we look at a 780, the prices of 780s now are ridiculously cheap, and a lot of people don't want them because of how power hungry they are. So when it all comes down to it, in this market, you've got to be proactive, you've got to be reactive, but most importantly, as we said in part one, you've got to do your own research. And the basic way to start with your own research is to look at the price segments and to look at Firestrike scores. Like, let's be real, Firestrike is one of the best benchmarks ever made because it relates so well to what you can expect out of a gaming PC in particular categories. For instance, if we look at an RX 570's Firestrike score, it'll probably get around 12,000 points on the graphics score. We look at a CPU like a i7-2600, might get around 8K physics scores. These combos are then at a price point of say 550, 600 Aussie dollars for this combo, providing everything else is good in the PC. And if we step it up for now 5700 XT, that'll probably get around 27,000 points. So that'll be practically over double the performance of an RX 570. So we're going to expect that now that field of that performance to at least be double the price. Sometimes it can be more because as we go to the higher end, diminishing return starts to kick in. Say for instance an RTX 2080 Ti, that's not going to be over double the performance of a 5700 XT, even though it's over double the price. So factoring in what you should price gaming PCs at particular levels, it all comes down to how well that PC will perform ultimately in games, but as well as what deals you're getting. So all the time, remember, if you're in this hustle for making a little bit of profit on the side, or you enjoy doing just making gaming PCs for people locally, the better deals you get, you're always going to be able to make more out of that than getting bad deals. And that's why a lot of the time, I hear of these people paying asking prices and they run around and they're not getting good deals. And then they message me and they're like, I can't sell my gaming PC, I'm losing money. And it's like, you've got to be patient, you've got to be disciplined. If you see that GTX 1066 gigabyte up there for 250 Aussie dollars and you don't have a PC that's already pre-sold, say for instance, someone hasn't put a deposit down on that PC, then you're taking a risk. For me, max I'm going to pay for that 1066 gigabyte is 200 Aussie dollars. End of story. Because I know when I put that in a gaming PC, I've now got the ability to make some money. At worst, I've got the ability to break even. So for me, I'm always putting in the back of my mind the worst case scenario, and that is breaking even. And believe it or not, I don't even think to this date I've ever lost money on a PC build. So basically all that self-learning over the last few years has enabled me to do this as a hobby, as well as show you guys on YouTube how to do it as well and enjoy it. And this is going to tie into the question of the day really well, because this comes from Galileo Bolden. Sorry if I butchered your name on the pronunciation. Is it actually sustainable to just flip PCs? Like, if you don't use the YouTube ads money, can you actually pay for bills and eat, etc.? I'm curious, like if you never had an office and you never did YouTube, that's a really good question, because if I never did YouTube, or if I wasn't doing YouTube and I wasn't doing any of this, I would still be doing it, definitely. It's worth it, but that being said, you've got to know what you're doing. Like, it's like any profession, I guess. If you don't do it right, you can lose money. I know, for instance, my dad's a builder. He knows so many builders that have gone bankrupt, and that's because they haven't done their trade right. So anything you do in this world, if you've got a set of skills and you can utilize that properly, then you can make money off it. For me doing YouTube as well, it's just a synergy thing. It goes really hand in hand, though there are a lot of times, like all these 6 PCs here on the desk, I never intended to make videos on them. That was just all behind the scenes stuff because I want to clear out a lot of the stuff in my studio and get a fresh mindset for 2020. Though I thought, okay, people are asking me questions about how to sell PCs, what do I do when it comes to selling PCs, all the stuff involved. I thought I'd take the opportunity to show you guys what goes in and what goes through the whole process. There is more than meets the eye when it comes to flipping gaming PCs, and there is a lot more below and beneath the surface that they should become automatic. It's like driving a car. The first time you do it, you're like, oh, whoa, I gotta hold the steering wheel, I gotta change the gear stick, I've gotta look right, look left. But then after a couple of years of driving, it's all just like, woo, out we go, driving around and getting those deals. And that's the same with PCs. Now it's just become a thing where I don't even, I guess, consciously think of what I'm doing. It's all unconsciously automatic thought that goes into it all, and I'm able to do it and enjoy it. That's the most important thing. So when it all comes down to it, I really love doing this. There are some new metas that I guess the one thing I'm enjoying the most is like the new AliExpress metas. So I'm definitely going to focus on that in 2020 because there's a lot of goodness coming in and markets constantly change. But one thing I am disappointed in a little bit is the GPU market, especially the sub like $200 level. That really hasn't gained a whole lot in the last few years. I remember back in 2016, you could get a GTX 1060 3GB brand new for like $170 delivered. Now, what have you got for $170 delivered? You got around a 1650 Super. The value for money in that segment just hasn't come far at all. Where the 1660 Super is really good, but don't get me wrong, but that's still a 229 USD graphics card. So it seems like that price point's got a bit of love and attention, but it feels like the sub $200 price point on GPUs hasn't come down to where I would like it personally to come down, because people are then sitting on their GTX 1070s and they're still asking good money for them, and that enables the used price performance flip to sort of come to a stagnant level, where it's ironic because GPUs were gaining so much up until 2016 and CPUs were kind of going nowhere. Now it's sort of the reverse, where Zen 2 is really pushing the CPU boundaries, but then the GPUs are just seem to be like, whew. So anyway, here's to hoping that $200 sub price point does get better in 2020. One can only hope. But with that aside, I hope you guys enjoyed this 2-part series. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button for us, and also let us know in the comments section below, what do you think about selling PCs? What do you do? Is there any personal tips that you're gonna share? Of course, if you don't wanna share them, I'll understand 100%. Anyway guys, I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. If you stayed this far and you're enjoying the different content around here at Tech Yes City, then be sure to hit that sub button and ring that bell to get that content the moment it drops. And I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.